Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Monday, June 8th, Agile Shift 2020 session. Before we start, I want to inform you about a feature in the presentation that'll make the session more interactive. Please make note of the question mark icon at the upper right corner of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question and answer feature, which allows our audience members to send our moderator questions to be delivered to the presenter at the appropriate time. We are proud to present Allison Pollard from Improving and Timothy Hagensen from American Airlines, who will be presenting Getting to Better Problems.
Thanks, Shervin. I'm really excited about this topic. When Tim and I had talked about it, we were looking at how Agile transformations often start off because there are some really big, complex problems in the organization. And it seems like we're wanting solutions, like to have things get better. But when we were coming in as coaches, we just thought, gosh, if we could just get to better problems than the one that we're facing today, that would feel like progress. And so we wanted to share an approach for continuous improvement for other coaches and for folks going through a transformation to maybe look at things a bit differently and see how you can make progress.
Okay, I'll go ahead and talk about myself real quick, just to introduce myself. I'm Tim Hagensen. I've got a little over 10 years of experience in software development. I've dedicated my entire career pretty much to working Agile ways. I was fortunate to have some very good mentors at the beginning of my career that taught me Agile from the start. I've been both a developer, tech lead throughout my career, primarily focusing on making it easier for developers to ship software into production. I've learned a ton over the years. Obviously, I learn more every year, and excited to be with you guys today.
I love that you mentioned you learn more every year. I think that's so true. And I'm Allison Pollard. I'm a technical director with Improving here in Dallas. I'm an Agile coach for a number of our clients. I'm also a certified professional coactive coach, a bit of a foodie, and I really love wearing glasses and changing up that style every year.
Okay, and what we want to talk about today is, why are we transforming? What needs to be done? There are a lot of different topics that may come up. You've got how the product team manages the development and the operational support to think about. You've got new SRE and DevOps roles coming onto teams. You've got QA shifting over to developers from manual testers, and then lots of automation and things like that going on.
Yeah, and because I think it's important to notice that when we were getting started with this transformation at American Airlines, it wasn't that Agile was brand new. You've actually been following Agile practices for probably a decade now and doing really well with it. The transformation was how to take it to the next level, becoming product-based and bringing in those DevOps practices that make it a lot more sustainable. And that's why all these questions came up of how do we change the team? What does that structure look like? How does the work flow through the team? And thinking about the practices that they were going to need to learn.
Correct. And yeah, one of the big things that really struck me recently as I've been looking at others in the industry, it's we were doing Agile, not being Agile. And that's really part of the mind shift that we had to adopt, was to actually be Agile.
Yeah, so I think about this, we're in an organization, a part of American Airlines that had about 100+ teams. So not a small group by any means. And they had seen some successes in a few cases of changing up those team structures and having these new practices brought in and being able to watch teams deploy up to 25 times a week. That's actually where Tim came from. You were on one of those early adopter teams and really embraced that experience and then became more of a coach to help the rest of the organization. And it was at that point we started working together and recognizing, how do we move forward? There's all these trees, we're stuck in the middle of the forest. We create the roadmap of practices and changes and what are the things that need to happen and get the leadership alignment. And I would find ourselves spiraling in circles in these meetings that we just kept coming back to, what's the first thing that we need to do? And we could never quite get an agreement on the first thing and then make progress on it. is like as soon as we started trying it, something else came up and it felt like we needed to shift our focus. And it was hard to see like how our roadmap and how our efforts were like staying in sync with one another.
Yeah, so that's a really great point. And that's where we started the shift to look towards continuous improvement rather than trying to complete items on a roadmap that we came up with all at the beginning. We found often that the roadmaps that we came up with, we were really making decisions when a time that we knew the absolute least possible. We hadn't given ourselves time to grow. And once we set those roadmaps in place, then we're often stuck being graded by things that weren't really a good plan to begin with.
Yeah. And because there was, these leaders that were helping us shape the roadmap, they were really involved in like defining what those results or what those outcomes were going to be. But then as we got into the coaching and actually like making the changes, we saw some turnover in leaders or people that were like less engaged during that implementation phase. And the teams that we were then working with, or those groups to help implement the changes, felt less ownership and less buy-in to the results that we were aiming for. And so we were trying to find out, like, what is a different way to do this that we could have higher engagement from the people that need to be making the changes while still getting the benefits that we were after. Now, I feel like we've already covered quite a bit, and so this is a good reminder. Like, if you're having questions, go ahead and type them into the chat. Tim and I will take questions as we go along instead of waiting till the end. So Tim, we decided to focus on continuous improvement. We've been working with some individual teams. We've been helping them to accelerate. We're seeing a couple of like great results from that. But then we noticed that trend where we're like accelerating them into the brick wall, as we called it, that they all started to get to the point where they hit the same organizational impediments, and we needed to do something about that. So tell us about like one of those problems that we encountered and why we focused on it in particular.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So our first problem comes to the AA.com platform. This is a platform that has, at any given time of the year, between 12 and 15 teams contributing to it. It's a gigantic code base, as big as any monolith anywhere else. It's been developed over the last 20 years. It has many different frameworks and structures in it where teams have thought they were going to be improving things, get about 5% of the way along, and then that would be abandoned as we worked on the next thing. So the problem that we had, and the problem that we've been trying to solve for a better part of 5 years or more, is we need to release this thing more often to production to meet customer needs. At the beginning, we were releasing around once a month. We had improved to that, but we had gotten to the point where it's like, how do we go further without making massive changes to the code? That was like really the only thing that people could come up with, like, we need these massive changes to the code. It's going to be 2 years at least for us to make all these architectural changes, and then maybe at that point we could release more often. And the problem is we've been in that 2-year cycle for about 4 or 5 years. It was always at least 2 more years away, with no end in sight and no improvement today. So that's really like the very first one that we started to focus on. We want to release more frequently, as often as like some of the bigger players in the overall tech marketplace are able to do it. So for us, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was gonna say we had our first question come in. Were you able to trace back any of these improvements to the economic results? And what was that like?
That's a good question. I think our first place that we were like trying to connect the results back to was looking at the like 4 metrics that came out of Accelerate, or the State of DevOps report, which will kind of talk a little bit about like how we saw some gains in those metrics as we addressed this problem. And then I think we could certainly like take it the step further in like how much money got saved, particularly with like the use of automation and saving some of the manual steps, and in being able to deploy more frequently and more reliably. I think the individual products could see how that enabled them to be making better product decisions that could help increase the revenue, if it's a revenue generating product, or like the number of customers served, if it's more like brand engagement related, or certainly cost savings.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Because one of the things to keep in mind is that even though like we're speeding up the time that we can get to market, with us having 12 or more teams at times, like releasing through this flow, if they don't also make the change to take advantage of the new agility that's been provided, they're not able to see those returns. We do have a few examples of teams that were able to do that, where they were able to say, okay, instead of building out a 9-month feature, let's build out a 1-month feature to test this in the marketplace to see if our customers like it. And we've had a few things like booking customers more than a dozen on the website. So we have things like that where we've been able to test those in market sooner, whereas before we would have just built the whole feature and hoped that the market liked it.
Yeah. All right, so this problem of releasing more frequently, really complex, a lot of moving pieces. And so we then decided to look at it through what we call the improvement kata model. And this comes from Mike Rother, a great author that introduced this after studying Toyota and how they were doing things. So we have this picture up here that tells us, we're thinking about, first of all, like what's the direction, or like what's the big challenge, that we want to tackle. And then the next thing we're going to do is look at our current condition. So help me understand, Tim, like what's the first step of like get the direction or like understand the challenge?
Absolutely. So when it comes to like the direction or challenge, that usually comes from leadership, not always, but like on big initiatives like this, it typically does. And it's a kind of a pie in the sky, like if I could have everything I wanted, this is what it would look like. So it's a statement that says like, here's the valuable thing I want in the future. It says nothing about how to get there. It's just like, this is what we want to occur.
All right, so in our case, we set this challenge around releasing more frequently as when a developer submits a pull request, their code is in production within 1 hour and every step of the deployment process is automated.
Exactly. And when we first delivered this to the team saying, hey, this is what we want, we got audible laughs and groans in the room saying that'll never happen. That's just not possible.
And that was like our litmus test. When we set a challenge or we like paint the picture of what the big problem is, we want it to be so out there that we hear the laughter, that we get the, oh my gosh, I don't know if that's even possible. Anything short of that kind of reaction tells us we might be playing it too safe. We really want to take people beyond what they think they can do in setting what that like far out target is.
Right, and so here, going back to the improvement kata model, that tells us, our first step was deploy when ready. So from there, it's like, okay, well, where are we at right now? And that was an exploration process. Like we didn't know fully where we were at the moment. We knew that we were doing between 1 a week and 1 a month, but like the pieces of how to do it, no individual person could tell you the whole thing.
Yeah. Tim, I'm wondering if the slides are advancing correctly.
Should see grasp the current condition right now.
Currently, it's only showing the intro slide.
Really? Interesting. Let me reshare it to see if it goes. Did that fix the slides?
Still on the first slide.
Do we see a different slide than the first one right now?
No.
Okay, I'm going to change this to my desktop instead of that and see if that works.
Just waiting to.
Okay, are we able to see now?
Yes.
Okay. We'll share the slide deck so that people get the pieces that we missed. It was primarily what we were talking about, though.
Cool. All right, so we've given them the challenge, and now we're trying to understand the current condition. And so, like you were saying, Tim, like there's so many different parts to this, and especially there were different people involved with different responsibilities around releasing. Because again, when we had 12 to 20 teams in a single code base, we're reliant on this like third party, in a sense, like release management group that handles making sure that the process is being followed, if there are any like approvals that are needed, sign-offs, making sure various steps are taken. And so we had to invite a number of these folks into a room together, gave them sticky notes, and they started putting up like the parts of the process that they were familiar with. And this has got to be like a good like 6+ feet of board that we end up posting on the wall to try and outline like what happens from beginning to end when we say, work has been approved by a product owner, it's now ready to go to production. Who all's involved and what do they do?
Right, exactly. And once we went through this process, we went through an exercise of like, okay, what do you guys think are the common themes of what's going on? And let's kind of group these together. So it's very similar to a value stream. We don't actually have the individual timings on this at that point because this is still very early discovery phase, just to get a high level idea of what's going on. So that gives us an idea of that current condition. And then we found out that, hey, we're deploying roughly weekly between the scheduled releases and any emergency deployments that we have.
Yeah, so that was our baseline. And we actually debated as facilitators, like where did we want the group to go next in the conversation? And we decided the best thing to do is, rather than talk about obstacles and all the reasons that we're gonna struggle to get better, let's first focus on like what our next target condition is gonna be, so that we can get some alignment and get some focus. And then later on, we can look at the obstacles and figure out how we're going to address those. Just from our recognition of the group, we had a lot of people that are very process oriented and very analytical. And we knew that if we asked about obstacles too soon, we were going to get probably another 6 feet worth of sticky notes and get bogged down in challenges that we might not need to address immediately. So that's why we go ahead and say, let's establish the next target condition.
Right, and this is something that we really put out to the team. This is not something like Allison said that us as facilitators decided for them. Like we nudged them in certain directions, but the key was that like this is something that the team has to own, and it has to be something that isn't putting undue burden on them. So like the team came up with this idea of 2 deployments per week. But the key for that was they're like, I don't know how to do this because like I have so much work. So the key was that like, okay, if we're going to do 2 per week, no one has to work extra hours to make it happen. So really the improvement then comes around like, how do we spend fewer hours working on this?
Yeah, and this speaks to the ownership, the engagement that the group had. When they could say no one's going to work extra hours for this to happen, that was a really big deal, because up until this point, those weekly deployments actually happened at night, off hours. And so this group of people every week, one day every week, has been getting online at night, going through their checks, kicking things off, doing their testing and validation, and then going to bed rather late that night. And so when they set the target as like 2 deployments per week with some nudging from the coaches, it was very immediate. Like, we cannot do it the way that we have been doing it. We need to figure out a different way of like the how.
So guys, while we're talking about deployments, we have a question about deployments and one other ones. Let me read you the deployment one first.
Okay.
Automated deployments require a lot of testing to have confidence that it'll work in production. What was that journey like?
Great question. We're going to be covering quite a bit on that because right now, like at this point in the journey, we've probably got around 50 or 60% coverage in testing automatically, whereas the rest of it is through manual testing. So we had a couple of different problems there. Our automation testing suite took pretty much the entire day, even though it didn't cover everything. And then we also had all the manual testing that was going on. We used a separate group to handle all of the automation testing. And what we found was that, like, because they were so worried about making sure that everything was covered and they weren't part of the development process, they were often testing the exact same functionality as many as 4 or 5 times. And they weren't always confident to pull it back just because they didn't know what other testing, like unit level testing and things like that, had been going on. So the very first part of that was actually shifting a lot of the testing out of the centralized group back to the product teams that are actually responsible for those portions of AA.com, so that they could then make those decisions and decide what needed to be tested and what didn't. And we're still on this journey, by the way. We're not completely done.
Right.
And get you the second real quick. Sometimes architecture changes are big. What have you discovered or methods of breaking up changes into smaller bits? For instance, an upgrade from a custom library to a standard library like Spring, or an architecture that relies on a great deal of data stored on the browser to stateless or backend data stored. What are some things you guys have discovered that help break them up into smaller pieces?
So yeah, just to start with, like, we've discovered stateful is a large problem. Like we've had a lot of difficulty when it comes to choosing like the automation technologies behind the scenes because we have so much state, both like on the client and on the server, to where like we have to continuously use sticky sessions and things like that, where that obviously causes problems. There are ways around that with some of the newer technologies, but I recommend against them. The goal is to get to stateless, and we're still on that journey currently. Like when it comes to our services, only the newer items that are being developed are stateless, whereas many of the older ones are still stateful, and we kind of have to figure that out. Like it makes Kubernetes deployments painful, but not undoable, but very painful until we're able to refactor out of that.
Yeah, I think the questions are
2 questions. I have a couple more.
Oh, well, I was going to say, I think they're starting to point to the obstacles we faced.
Yep, and we will be getting into some of those too.
Okay, one of these seems very relevant, so I'm going to read it right now. It's based off what Allison was mentioning a second ago. What were the problems in getting everyone together to discuss the current conditions? Actually, how did you overcome the resistance to wasting time doing this?
In this case, we had like high level sponsorship, because we again, it accelerated a couple of teams into this brick wall where the teams were ready to deploy, but the release management process couldn't keep up. And the manager of the release management folks was bought in. And so he helped, us get that first kickoff scheduled. And we took, I think, like a day or two off site to basically have these conversations. Yeah,
we found problems like even finding space large enough for the amount of people. And then we made sure that we bought breakfast for them. We bought lunch for them, had drinks available in the room. It's like anything we could do to make it as easy as possible for those people to join us.
Yeah.
And it was a struggle, but like with the leadership support and like the management staff saying, hey, this is important, make time for it, we were eventually able to get that done.
We got a couple more, but I think I'll let you guys present some more, and then I'll bring them up as I'll sprinkle them in at the appropriate times.
All right.
All right, great. All right, so this is kind of getting into like a lot of the obstacles. So once we had like talked about what the team decided their next target condition was going to be, we started an obstacles board. Essentially, it's like, okay, like what obstacles are there for this target condition only? So like we're narrowing the focus, we're bringing it in, making sure that like problems outside of the room like still got captured on like essentially an obstacles backlog, but only the ones that would prevent us from getting this one done were put on the board, and then they were grouped.
Yeah, and this was useful in then framing the experiments that we were going to try.
Exactly, good point. So for the experiments, we had lots of ideas. We've listed some of them here. There are quite a few more than this, but like centralizing change managements from 3 systems to 1 system, training the individual product teams to start adding the release notes into the change requests. We spent, once we measured it, we were spending, like 10, 12 hours a week asking people for the release notes that they had already written. We started shifting left on testing. We talked about that a little bit, where the product teams own some more of it. We tried removing one of the staging environments. We gave power to the performance team to actually create their own environments so that they could do their performance. Removing sign-offs that were bottlenecks, and a few others. Some of them didn't work, but that's okay. The real key is, as you see at the bottom, is that the first target condition we were able to reach literally with only process changes. Not a single line of code was needed for us to actually hit the 2 per week, and also not increase any work on any individual person. So that was a really exciting moment for us.
Yeah, I remember there came a point, as we're having these regular check-ins with the release management group, we're looking at how's the experiment going, and then deciding what's the next one that we're going to try. At some point, we were in a conference room together, and I think the coaches kind of looked down and realized, wait, isn't there a deployment happening today? And the group actually said, oh yeah, it's happening right now. That we had gotten to the point where they were so confident in the process changes and the experiments that we had implemented along the way, that it was totally fine for the release to be happening as a non-event, that it could actually take place during business hours.
Right, exactly. That's a great point. So as Allison mentioned earlier, we really look to the accelerate metrics that are from the DevOps report as kind of our guiding principle across American Airlines for how we want product teams to deliver software. We want it more frequent, shorter lead times, which should lead to lower change fail rates and lower mean time to recover. And we stress that they have to focus on improving all of them together. So as we've been doing this, we've noticed within our .com process that we have fewer failures, primarily because there's fewer changes going in. We don't have people rushing to get the change in at the last minute because they know another release is going out in 2 days. So it's okay if they wait that 2 days. So this graphic gives you an idea of where we're at today. We're actually a bit further than this. So we deploy during the day now. We deploy roughly 3 times a week on schedule, but that team also accommodates some out of cycle deployments if teams request it. So they've been able to accelerate quite a bit. We're now to the point where we're having to look at technology to get faster, or hiring tons more people just because of the individual manual processes.
Shervin, were there any more questions that we should talk about right now?
I have a boatload of CI/CD questions if you guys are ready.
Sure.
Yep.
So the first one is what percentage of regression is run as part of the CI process?
I don't know the exact number on it. I haven't checked it recently. It's considerable. We've been focusing on training teams on doing like full end-to-end testing and having them automate it from the beginning. Not all teams are there yet. For that, everything that is available, we run on the pipeline, and we've been able to kind of clean that up and make things better. There are still some teams that do manual regressions within their section of the code that they pretty much own exclusively of others, and they do that on their feature branches before merging it into master. And as we're able to, we're continuously trying to help teams get better at doing the automation.
The next one is, do you recommend a UI-based functional automation testing as part of the CI/CD process?
It's hard to say recommend, because I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to what works for your teams. I think it's important to let individual product teams choose their own tools. In my experience, I've seen things like, Microsoft's front-end framework for actual testing. I've seen that been used successfully. I've seen recorded Selenium tests that are then manually modified be used successfully. My personal favorite is just protractor tests, and developers writing them all from scratch during their regular development lifecycle, doing it full TDD and starting with the end-to-end tests at the beginning. That's my personal recommendation, but there are many that are very good.
And I think that goes back to like when we were stuck at the beginning in this like roadmap approach, we would get into these conversations like, what is the way that the teams should be doing things? And as we interacted with more and more teams, we found there isn't like a single way, that like they have different problems, they have different like immediate needs, and we could work through those on like a case-by-case basis. But our roadmap just kept changing in priority and changing like what those features or like what those practices were that we needed to be addressing. And that's part of why this continuous improvement approach was like a breath of fresh air, I think, for the coaches, for the leaders, and for the teams themselves, that we could start with like a particular outcome in mind, and then be having like the group, the team engaged in defining what are we going to try to get there in order to realize those benefits.
All right, the next one we have is automation at the service layer best at, the automation at the service layer best as part of the CI/CD process.
So is automation at the service layer the fastest part of it?
Is automation at the service layer best at the CI/CD process?
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to like your entire testable unit, ideally what you want is to be able to spin up the entire environment together plus all of its dependencies on the CI/CD pipeline or similar, test them, and then shut them back down. Because obviously you don't want environments running constantly, and you don't want like various people's branches and things like that tripping on each other. So like for us, we're getting to the point now where it's like within an individual branch, you get your own Kubernetes containers for your pieces of AA.com, and no one else actually steps on top of you.
You guys have time for one more CI/CD based question? I'll hold out the other ones till later.
Cool.
So they ask you, did even one of the twice weekly deployments still require off-hour support? Or did all of the process improvements remove that need?
This team would know better than me. So like, I believe the answer to that is no once we switched to daily deployments. Because like when we first switched to twice weekly, they were still at night.
Right.
And then once we got to that milestone, we asked the team, hey, what do you guys want to do next? And like unanimously, they said deploy during the day because they wanted to stop deploying twice a week at night.
Yeah, and at that point, we also looked at the analytics to see what the traffic on the website was like, and that's where we were able to use some data to recognize that there actually is part of the afternoon during business hours that is lower, and it would be just as safe as if we were doing it later at night, and so that helped boost the confidence of the group to go ahead and do daytime deployments. So let's talk about questions. Oh man, I would say, Tim, like we have other examples of how we use this.
We do. Let me see if I still have that slide. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these are just some other examples of using like this continuous improvement approach, the improvement kata to kind of figure things out. We've had one team that I worked with in the past. They had a service or like a working agreement saying that, hey, all of our automated tests need to complete in under 10 minutes. So as long as their tests were under 10 minutes on the pipeline, they didn't worry about it. But every so often as they're adding features and things like that, it would lead to them like going over that 10-minute threshold. And that would then lead them to like some innovation, like concurrent test data setup, concurrently running some tests, reusing some test data when the test data isn't actually modified by the test, things like that, where they were able to like speed it up and get it under the 10 minutes. And then from there, they kind of use that as their guide to stop improving and working on more features and things like that. I know one that Allison worked on immensely with our leadership team was connecting more effectively with their people. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, because talk about like a very different way of using the improvement kata. This was all about the culture. So at the time, American Airlines, leaders knew we were going to be moving into a new headquarters. It was going to be a much more open space. The leaders were going to sit, like right there in the open amongst the teams. And they wanted to be building that culture of, being more approachable, connecting with people, showing that they really care. And so I remember facilitating a offsite workshop with them, first defining like what do we want for the teams? Like what is the culture that we're envisioning? Like what would that feel like, you know, when it is successful? And from that, you know, they started, you know, like walking around a little bit to their people and explaining, you know, here's what we're trying to do. This is why we're transforming. You know, this is the empowerment that I want your team to have. And that first experiment of just like walk around and talk to your people about the culture was kind of awkward. They didn't really talk to their people that openly before, and now to go have this conversation was really kind of strange. If you can imagine, suddenly your managing director, like a VP, walks over to your desk. There are people that like, you know, sit up straight and like they're trying to look like they're hard at work. Like, why is the boss here? Like the big boss, you know, like what's happening? And so the leaders recognize, like, I want people to, you know, feel more relaxed when I show up. I want us to be more transparent. I want us to be more open with one another. And so we set these like weekly experiments. And what was really amazing to me, there was like all these small changes of just like, go interact with them and try this, go and try that. And the one that really seemed to click was actually having these like plush soccer balls that on each section had like a different question. And they would show up with the soccer ball and say, hey, I want to do a quick icebreaker. And they would throw it to someone. And whichever section your like right thumb was on, you're going to answer that question. And teams got excited about this. They were like, fun, like, this is awesome. I get to like play a game. My leader is interested in me. They're getting to know me a bit better. I get a little bit of a break from the work. And the leaders now are excited, like, oh, I get to be the person that, you know, kind of changes the energy for that team for like 10 minutes or so. I remember hearing that there were certain teams so excited about this, they wanted to know when the leader was going to come back and play it again with them. Like that might be a day where they like dress nice, or like they all wear like a certain color, you know, to kind of like show their team spirit. And it was, you know, such a small thing, but it had a really big impact on the organization because it did create some relationships and like break the ice between people on the teams and people a couple of layers above them, so that when they moved into the new office, into the new headquarters, people were more relaxed and more friendly and much more approachable either direction. And then our last example here, so we have product teams that want easier access to the data. So as you can imagine, in a large enterprise, we have a centralized data group that helps with the storage of all this information. And now that we have teams that are going to own their products, so they're going to own the new enhancements as well as the production support and maintenance of it, they need to know how is that product performing, and they would ideally like to see that in real time. And that's not information they had historically when they worked in individual projects. And so this was another interesting, I think, improvement kata workshop where we get this like cross-functional group together, people on a product team, people from the data organization. We start outlining the current process, that current system. And there were a lot of aha moments as people brainstormed, you know, what is it that a person has to do as a developer to get access? And there were a number of like journeys along the way of like, well, you do this, but at this point it could possibly get rejected and you're gonna have to like go back to the beginning. And then assuming you can like progress past that, there's this other thing and that could go either way. And so it just became this like really big diagram of all the steps that could take, I think, a number of months to get through. And so then painting the vision of how does a team have that access, you know, in real time that they can be storing new data and retrieving it was, again, one of those laughable moments. People in the room were just going, there's no way, that's so crazy. How is that even possible?
All right, I think we're probably ready for additional questions.
Yeah.
And I have plenty for you guys. The first one's going to be about is the example you guys speak about a monolith or services with toggling and routing? And the follow-up question is, how do you manage test dependencies between the teams?
So for this one, it's a monolith primarily. There are a few spas that have been broken out that kind of live on their own and they're individually tested. Our primary test dependency is our booking and reservation system. That's a mainframe system from the 70s. So like that one has been proven more difficult to, spin up your own copy because it's from a different company, things like that. So we do like manage that pretty heavily to where there are like ways to kind of reserve like certain flights and things like that so that you're not stepping on each other. We're still working on better things for that. But with it being a monolith, like people are able to just kind of bring up nearly the entire thing on their own within Kubernetes. And then separately, they can bring up their other dependencies on whichever hosting platform they're using, whether it be Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes, or just app services in Azure or something like that.
Another testing one. It seems like this is a heterogeneous test strategy. Has there been any? What are the advantages or disadvantages for you?
Okay. Really, I mean, when it comes to like the current strategy, it's not so much that it's like a heterogeneous test strategy. It's just kind of the one that we fell into. Like over time, like developers and teams have thought that it was a good idea to shift from completely manual testing to automated testing. And like with so many like hands in the pot and working on it, this is just kind of where we've ended up. We want it to be to the point where like individual product teams own their own testing and nothing else, and then have more of like a platform focus around it. But we're still like on the journey, so to speak, on that, to where like we don't have it to where each person can own their own.
Yeah, and I think that's also why we have certain communities of practice so that there can be learning and sharing across the teams. So it's not as though you're having to start completely from scratch or like make everything up on your own. You might talk to the other developers or folks on the other product teams and find out, oh, you're using that framework, how do you get this thing working in it and be able to make progress with it in their own product.
The next question we have deals with compliance. Have you run into any barriers with compliance for the twice weekly deployments such as the FAA or PCI?
Yes and no. Like for PCI, no. And like for the FFA, not really, but like we do have like various items that from time to time have to be delayed. They can't just be thrown in. Typically the product teams like know themselves whether or not that's going to be a restriction, and they take care of that separately. That's not something that the central team is responsible for. Like they're just doing a deployment that's ready to be deployed.
Our last two questions deal with more at the organizational level. What happened to middle management as the big boss took more interest in the place of work?
Good question. The middle managers are still there. They still have their job, their normal function. It meant that they actually got involved in some of these experiments as well. So as you start to see that the VP or the managing director is making an effort to connect with people, you like see that behavior being modeled, and then we would see that the middle managers would also kind of like try and run their own experiments, but very loosely, of like what are they also doing to create the openness, create the transparency, and create the connection with people. And again, like that thumb ball, that like soccer ball, I'll tell you that was like so popular. Like we ordered quite a few of them. So like managers have them, upper leaders have them. I think they get used at staff meetings. They might be used at skip level meetings. They became, I think, part of the culture for at least a period of time because people were seeing the benefit. They were so excited about using that.
Allison, it's so popular, it's the topic of our next question. How would you do the icebreaker, the soccer ball example, in the virtual world? It's such a great activity.
Oh yeah, like just off the top of my head, if I imagine having these like icebreaker type questions on, like a slide, let's say, having some kind of a random number generator, and letting a person realize like, okay, you're going to answer question number 5 out of the 20, I think would be a really easy way to simulate that experience of you're getting a topic that you hadn't really anticipated. So off the cuff, like what's your answer to it? But it is from a set list.
That set list is also what is the next topic. Somebody asked if you can share the list of questions that were used on the soccer ball.
Oh, I can look for the soccer balls because I know they're part of like a leadership toolkit website, and there's a couple different varieties out there. So like there's one around leadership questions. There's one you can use for debriefing activities. There's an icebreaker. I forgot the other ones, but there's a number of existing like sets of questions you can choose from. Or we even, bought a soccer ball and like came up with our own list of questions and then hand wrote them with a Sharpie.
All right, that was the last one.
Cool. So looking back, Tim said earlier, every year he gets better and better. It's been a couple years since we had the transformation roadmap approach. And I think now that we looked back on it, it all made sense at the time, but it's not how we would do it now, knowing what we know. We found so much, forward progress and like these great outcomes with the engagement, the ownership by taking the improvement kata approach. And we also found it was really kind of lightweight and easy on our side. We would do an initial kickoff and spend that time up front, and then it'd be regular check-ins with the group to help nudge them and encourage them, notice the accomplishments that they have along the way. But it wasn't quite as a heavy investment as when we were taking that roadmap approach, and we're in lots and lots of meetings. We're having all these conversations with the groups independently and feeling like we have to come up with a lot of training materials or, try and get things working consistently in a specific way across the entire enterprise or across the entire organization. And so I think for me, it feels like that difference between, Superman versus like Clark Kent of, I can feel like I have to come in and do all these heroics and like try to bust down every single wall, or I can be like the everyday hero and just help other people recognize like what needs to happen and how they can be a part of it.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I think this also really shifts the conversation from management to the teams. When it comes to a transformation roadmap, typically it's like, what's the deadline? When are you going to get it done? Why haven't you switched over to this cloud yet? You said you were going to do it by this time. And you're never really like measuring whether or not it gave you what you thought it was going to give you at the beginning. Like the shift is that now you're going over to them saying, hey, have we improved on the metric we talked about? Are your tests running in under an hour? Are you able to deploy multiple times per day? Like, how often do we have to roll back changes? You're able to talk about those conversations and ask people to improve on those, and then let your engineers, who like are typically the best suited to come up with solutions to engineering problems, figure it out and get it done for you. So I really like the shift in conversation. And then do we have any additional questions?
We actually do not right now.
Wow. Well, if you have any thoughts, we still have a few minutes left. You can type into the chat. Or I think Tim and I both would just love to hear from people, what your thoughts are, and, if you try this approach, how those experiments go. And so we have our contact information up here available to you. This has been really good. This has been a great conversation, hearing the questions and the things that people are most interested in. has been awesome.
All right, guys. Well, thank you, Allison, and thank you, Tim, for your presentation. And thank you for everyone for attending today's session titled Getting to Better Problems. We value continuous improvement in your feedback, so please complete a survey for this session by logging into sketch.com, locating the session. Again, it's called Getting to Better Problems, and clicking the feedback survey button. The recording of the session will be available to stream shortly. To view the recording, locate the session from sketch.com and click the video stream button. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of Agile Shift 2020.